Welcome to Green Kite's Ask the Experts. In this podcast series, we cut through the jargon and we try and get straight to what really matters in our industry. So if you are having issues, you're navigating tricky changes, then you're in the right place. Come listen to us and we'll help you tackle those questions in insurance, one episode at a time. Hi, good afternoon and welcome to the Green Kite podcast. Ask the Experts, and today we'll be asking a very renowned expert in the world of delegation what you need to do and how to do it better, loosely. I'm delighted today to introduce Richard Marshall. He's one of my buddies from the market. We've known and worked alongside one another for a while now. He currently works at Antares Group, heading up the underwriting in the delegated space, working in their insurance platform primarily, which was launched in January earlier this year. But he comes with a huge history and a long list of credentials. He started back in the 1990s working with the French and the Germans, backing MGAs when they first came into fruition. And then that's when he and I met, when we both worked within an MGA. And increasingly, in recent years, he's focused on improving the underwriting efficiency and the performance through his innate delight with delving into data and analysing the outcomes. So before his time, data and reporting was key in identifying good cover holders. So welcome, Richard. And as I say, really, really pleased you could make time and you're willing to impart some of your expertise.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, great to be here.
So you know, as I said, this is all things about delegation, and I guess it would be remiss of me not to say and cover off on the regulator's role. The regulated environment is increasingly stringent, and I think it's been particularly onerous for those underwriting in the I was going to say consumer space, but I guess I should use the correct definition and say the customer space. So consumer duty has brought a whole new realm of checks and balances and lenses through which to look. But I don't think it's just consumer duty that's changed the perspective in the delegated space. I think there's been a whole raft of controls and governance around underwritings and changes and expectations that are placed on CUOs or senior underwriters within the delegated team. And I just wondered if you could give some kind of view about what that's done to you, or what impact that's had on your day-to-day working life, Richard.
Yeah, sure. So consumer duty. Consumer duty came along July 23. That has been a seismic shift. I think it's fair to say for those of us involved in retail business. We at Antares, so we identify consumer duty risks both for the consumers themselves, so those buying insurance for their personal use, but also for micro businesses and the S of SME. So for us, it's a very wide remit.
I think that's the wider definition of customer there you're covering on, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, exactly right.
Yep.
So it's the delegated space, that the principles of delegated underwriting, delegated claims authority management, I think are very well understood. The practice and the success of the delegated model is rather more complex and rather harder to achieve. So consumer duty, we at Antares, we have an appetite to work with MGAs in the consumer space. So we're very familiar with the model and the requirements. I think it has impacted us in all facets of our operational model. So, for example, when we are onboarding a new partner to work with.
Loving the use of the word partner, Richard. That's a new one in the delegated space.
Well, I think it has to be a partnership, to be honest. It has to be a very close alignment of interests. Sure. So when we onboard, for example, traditionally we'd be looking at underwriting performance. We'd be looking if there's a claims TPA, the claims due diligence piece, and the operational processes, practices, controls, etc. Overarching that now, we have consumer duty, which has a number of new requirements. So we are asking different questions now. We're looking at different aspects of the MGA and how they operate, particularly around the data that they can help us to measure the outcomes that we need to monitor and report on. So it's a seismic change.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, just from listening to you, even when we used to work in together, and we used to work closely, didn't we? So, and when we sat on the exec, my team would be more responsible for the due diligence and the oversight and the ongoing management, and you would be more looking at the underwriting performance and kind of analysis data. But it seems now, and I think that's only right, that with consumer duty, it kind of all falls to underwriting, right? So you can't say, oh, that's compliance's responsibility, that's governance's responsibility. It feels to me that the CEO or the head of underwriting, whatever you're called, actually that person is effectively responsible for the whole of the process now, because if they're not, then I can't see how they can apply that customer outcome lens to anything that they're underwriting.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So for me, consumer duty is cross-functional. Okay,
Yep.
And it starts with the culture of the organisation. So if we just look at our own organisation, for example, so when we talk about culture, we should think about behaviours and customs and the principles and the values that we want to operate with.
Yep.
Culture starts right at the top. It starts with the board. The board themselves then, at the top of that hierarchy, essentially delegate the responsibilities that they have to various people and groups and committees, etc. Now, the alignment of interest for the organisation is imperative, because what you can't have is two or three of those groups or those teams doing the right thing, and then another team that kind of is behind the curve, okay, and drops the ball.
No, because you're effectively accountable for outcomes. So that means someone has to take a holistic view of everything, right?
Correct, exactly. So for example, as I say, now when we are onboarding or renewing a cover holder, the claims team, working in combination with ourselves in underwriting or in compliance or in legal or whoever else may be in terms of the stakeholders, everybody has to have the customer interest, the customer outcome in their minds as they're going through their processes and they're actioning their work.
And that in my observation has been quite a hard role and adaptation of the role for the board to actually get their head around not consumer duty as a defined regulatory requirement, but more actually how it gets evidenced and presented to them, because that's the challenge as well, isn't it, on the ground? What do you escalate, and what data and analysis and findings do you share with the board so that they can perform their function and properly challenge and meet their consumer duty champion requirements, I guess?
Yeah, very good point. So, the board, generally speaking, the board sits once a quarter.
Yeah.
The board has got a lot of things to consider. It has a lot of responsibilities. So the way that we manage that escalation of information is essentially through the governance structures.
Okay.
So, for example, we as an underwriting team, we meet monthly. We have our own actions. We have our own reporting that we undertake. We have then, for example, a monthly POG, product oversight and governance, or groups.
And is that multidisciplinary, or is that purely underwriting that attend that?
No, cross. It encompasses all functions, all internal stakeholders. That meets once a month. So there's a whole bunch of reporting and information and data that gets presented at POG, which is then reviewed and challenged.
So as your job then, it's even wider now, because almost within that the scope of that POG, you're responsible for that whole multidiscipline team, aren't you? Because they need to come together to provide advice and analytics, and for you guys to make decisions on that delegated book, right?
Correct. Yep. So there's a whole bunch of new responsibilities that sit there with POG. POG
That
then
you know
reports.
well, I'm sure.
POG, POG then reports into the underwriting committee.
Okay.
So the underwriting committee takes that information along with a whole suite of other performance metrics and KPIs, etc., to review and to think about. That then acts as a filter for the information that needs to be presented at board, because you know we can only present so much to the board.
Yeah.
We need to kind of pick out what are the really key themes, what are the highlights, what are the outliers.
So what do you think, to get the right type of data collected and interrogated to meet customer duty requirements, what kind of things are you interested in, generally, not specifically in your portfolio, but what types of data are you looking at?
So a whole lot of new stuff,
Okay.
to start with.
Mm-hmm.
So we at Antares, we've been going through quite a detailed process in terms of extending our data capture. So
Okay.
from our exposure data, the written bordereaux, effectively, the
So
information.
effectively asking people what information they're going to give you.
That's great. And anybody in the delegated space will be familiar with what we term exposure data. So in very simple terms, what it is, where it is, how much there is of it, what values are at risk, what other kind of key exposure characteristics there are. But what we're interested now for consumer duty is widening that, the scope of that information. So, for example, we are now starting to collect information relating to premium finance, to policy fees, to add-on products. So, what we're interested in now is the overall premium, the overall price, the cost to the retail customer, and the breakdown of those costs. So, for example, for premium finance, if premium finance is utilised, then we want to know the APR percentage. We want to know the pound value, and then we've got a relativity there of that costing against the overall premium. The same if there's policy fees, new business renewals, MTAs, etc.
So that's a whole new level of sophistication of data analytics that you need to be aware of and made available to you, I guess, from anyone in your supply chain, which is one of the difficulties within the delegated space, right? Quite often you have a convoluted supply chain. Okay. But then when you get that data, what do you do with it? I mean, that's always my observation, Lots of organisations historically have collected data, but then they've gone, well, thanks to the data, and it's kind of laid there dormant.
So this is again a very good point. So a lot of this is new data, and when we talk about this new data, it's not just quantitative data; it's also qualitative data that we're starting to bring in. So one of the problems, one of the challenges that we have is that not all of this data comes in at the same time in the same format. So
that's not new, is it?
No, that's very true. But it means that we've got to find ways now of consolidating this data, because all of this information is useful for the measures. So, for example, when we talk about qualitative data, this is quite new for insurers. This is where we're trying to understand customer sentiment, customer behaviours. We're trying to get more indications. So, for example, of vulnerability.
So we're all kind of learning on the job a bit, aren't we? Because I guess quite a lot of the stuff that you're employing and looking at internally within Antares, the difficulty and the additional burden, I guess, for you guys when you do delegate is you need to educate any of your MGAs and cover holders as to why and why you're collecting it, and actually what you're going to do once you collect it, right?
That's true. We are pushing it an open door, because in terms of the distribution model, so for example, let's say there's a retail broker, then we have the MGA, then we have ourselves as the delegated the insurer who's delegating the authority to underwrite. All three of those organisations are regulated.
Okay. Yeah.
All three have the same responsibilities under consumer duty regime. So
Hmm.
it's I don't think it's so much a um, difficulty in having the conversation why. It's more trying to access the information regularly and efficiently. That's more of the challenge, I think. Once we bring it into the organization, then again there's a whole set of new and analytics that we need to start to consider. So in previous world, a decade ago, we're concentrating on underwriting performance, all of the sort of the traditional KPIs that any insurer would be, any
Hmm.
underwriter would be familiar with. Now, for example, what we're interested in is trying to bring to life and measure the four outcomes. Okay, kind of the product, the value, the understanding, the support through data that we can then evidence. Okay, that we're doing the right thing, that the product is suitable, that the price is fair, that the support to the customer throughout the product life cycle is appropriate, and there's not they're not being there's no detriment, for example, to buying a product or during the life cycle, engaging as a touch point for an MTA or a claim. So, excuse me. So this data now we need to consolidate it and bring different pieces of data together to say to ourselves, right, okay, so let's take age as a vulnerability or a prospective vulnerability. Okay,
Hmm.
so now we need to think to ourselves, right, okay, so how can we measure fair value for this product using age as a characteristic? And then can we see in perhaps complaints data
Right.
or some of the claims data
Yeah.
um, additional information that we can then bring together to say, okay, this is fine, we don't have an issue, or do you know what? We maybe have something might be here, and we need to have a think about this when we translate it back into our product or into the way that product is distributed.
And a couple of things spring to mind just from what you're saying on that, Richard, and that is firstly, some of the smaller MGAs and cover holders actually might not have the breadth or the depth of technical expertise within their organization to collect or know what data that they need to collect, because this sounds like a proper analytics job rather than an underwriter. Historically it would be an underwriting assistant's job to kind of collect and provide this information, but it's like there seems to be a whole new technical advance that's required within the underwriting space to be able to do this. And secondly, it seems to me that if the cover holder or MGA don't have a suitable technology platform, that therein of itself causes them a great problem, because it was always bad, wasn't it, when MGAs as startups used to use Excel, but with all this additional data and fields that are so critical to the whole of the regulatory framework now, I just can't imagine um, what trials and tribulations will be created if someone run that on an Excel spreadsheet. It just doesn't even seem feasible now.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, to be honest, we wouldn't engage in a contract of delegation with an MGA unless we were entirely confident and satisfied that they had the correct processes and controls and governance structures and able to supply the majority of this information.
I don't think you're alone on that regard either. I think although there is more people, particularly reinsurers and fronters, coming into the market, they're all taking the same stance as you. Actually, or Antares, not you, Antares. If you can't provide this information, how do we invest and develop this partnership between ourselves? Because actually, this is pivotal to the transparency of the arrangement.
That's correct, and we're happy to help and support, to
Yep.
give our experience, to give our advice.
Hmm.
Um, Also, I mean, there are other organisations out in the market, such as yourself at Green Kite, who
Hmm.
can offer that expertise and that advice to support as well. So, it's although it's been over a year now, well, a year and a half since the since Consumer Duty came in July 23. There's still a lot of learning going on, I think, in the within the MGA model.
Okay.
So one aspect, for example, we were looking at just the other day is audit.
Okay.
Okay, so audit is
It's an interesting one. Yeah.
yeah. So audit, for most people, it's the third line of defense, right? First line of defense is the operations and the controls there. Second line is the risk and compliance. Third line is audit. An audit is it's well established. There are sort of industry standards, I think, in terms of the how and the who and the where. The interesting one for us now is bringing in the tests, the measures for consumer duty within that audit work. Now, most people who are involved in audit are extremely good and very professional and very competent at what they've been doing, probably for the last, I don't know, X number of decades. Consumer duty is different. So there's a different set of questions to be asked. And those questions are not necessarily box tick answers. There has to be some thought.
Yeah, I mean, we actually run some training for Dara, who are a market group, just on this point, because I totally agree with you. Um, I like to think that consumer duty isn't a tick box question set on an audit. It's more what I deem as a pervasive topic, in that it impacts everything around the organisation. And actually, how do you measure and quantify culture? And culture is so integral to living and breathing the regime. What can an auditor do to kind of detect that? And I think auditors are actively trying to reframe some of their question sets and their approach to kind of address this kind of thing.
I agree entirely. It's the same with the work that work with audit. It's a perpetual improvement regime, right? We're constantly learning, we're constantly improving. That's the whole the process of the feedback loops. More information we've got, more analysis we can conduct to measure and to assess and to evaluate, etc. So I think excuse me. So with audit, that is and continues to be an evolving practice.
Okay.
We're getting better at it. I think the people who we're working with for our third-party auditors, they themselves are getting better, not just obviously engaging with ourselves, but with wider market. I think we have to be conscious as well. We have to be very clear on our requirements that we're asking the auditors.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just say, go and check consumer duty, want to make sure everything's fine. Well, no, I think we need to be a little bit more definitive, exactly what we're asking them to look at, what measures.
And ultimately, because I think that is organisation dependent as to what you deem important from a consumer duty framework perspective within your actual business, not what the market does. Obviously, there's market benchmarking and people are doing similar stuff, but actually, what's important to you might not be the same as important to another insurer out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree entirely. So it's and then of course, as with other data, once that audit is completed, as usual, there's a bunch of recommendations and other pieces, etc. We then have to take that apart. We then have to learn from it. We share that obviously with our MGA partner, where we're looking for improvements. What are the good pieces? What are the pieces that we may need to address? For those ones, obviously, then we'll put in an action plan, a timeline, etc. But it's all grist to the mill. It's all information. Excuse me, coming. So, I'd like to think that we at Antares Insurance are a knowledge sharing organisation, because for me, communication, knowledge share, that's so important. Silos, detrimental, don't work. I've been involved in some of those in the past, and that's not how you want organisations to work and to flourish.
Yep.
And then you've got that collective organisational knowledge, and that permeates throughout. So it's within all of the various teams and the groups and the committees, etc., etc. So the entire organisation uplifts in terms of its competency and its professionalism.
So, I mean, having worked in delegated authority for a while, both sides of the fence, dare I say it, gamekeeper and poacher, if you like, um, it still seems to me that you're on a trajectory of great learning almost, because the role you started, dare I say it, 20 plus years ago, Richard, sorry to age you, and the role you do now, although are similar, they are quite distinct and different from each other. Is that a fair assumption?
It is. It is. There are.
So what gets you out of bed and makes you do it still?
My God.
That's a bit deep, isn't it? No,
It's.
I mean, what do you enjoy most now about working in delegated authority?
I think it's the. I think it's working with some really talented people
Okay.
internally and
Yep.
externally.
Mhm.
I think it's. I'm an absolute advocate of the MGA model. I've worked in that model as yourself, Sarah, for a number of years.
Yep.
Um, it's a vibrant model. Um,
Agreed.
it thrives on agility and innovation. So if you think, the model itself it's a cost, it's a distribution cost. So to be successful and to remain successful, MGAs need to be ahead of the curve. They
Yep.
need always to be thinking about efficiencies, about new products or product refreshes, about how they can do things slightly differently.
I mean, but actually, the whole of the changes around product governance and consumer duty are supportive for that kind of business model, aren't they? You know, because actually they ask and require you to technically review your product and your price when there's any
Absolutely.
change. So I think actually, you know, as arduous as some of the people might find the process, actually it lends itself to those agile organisations. So I would agree with you, and I also think it is forcing insurers, and I think, you know, Antares are lucky to have you in their team because you've always been quite forward thinking, and because you have worked in large MGUs and MGAs, you can see it from the other side of the fence as well. I think, you know, organisations that truly work alongside and support their MGAs and cover holders are actually ultimately going to be looking after their customers better, but making better underwriting profits and building portfolios where the performance is strong, because all these things are aligned. And if there is that joint enterprise, so to speak, then that can only aid that, surely.
No, I agree. If we think about the principles of consumer duty, kind of why it's there, it's it's a response to um, helping the customer to build greater trust and have wider confidence in our industry. All right, how we treat them, how we engage with the customers. Now that can only be good. Okay, everybody's got a story about a bad insurance claim or how
Yeah.
difficult it was, etc., etc. And our business is focused on and predicated on customers buying insurance products. Okay,
It's funny you say that. One of our team always says that we are only where we are because we were so wrong in the first place. Which I think is kind of ironic, particularly since as they're a regulatory expert. But, you know, she said, be careful what you wish for. The reason why we've got the framework that we've got is because we didn't do it very well without the help from and guidance from someone else. So, you know, there is an element of that. However, I do think the future for delegated authority business is bright, because if you do it right and correctly, you can provide good products. You do have access to unique market segments, and actually you can make profit from it if you run it in a streamlined and efficient manner, as I know you
yeah,
will.
100%. I mean, it's an ultra competitive market out there. It's Everybody's got different products, different price points, different methodologies of distribution. We're all kind of in it together. Um, in terms of the future of the model, I have high levels of confidence that it will continue to grow, that it will continue to improve. We can see a good pipeline of new MGAs
Yeah.
coming through. So we see a lot of business plans, which is fantastic. We see incumbent MGAs growing.
Hmm.
There's obviously a lot of consolidation in the market. again, which is natural.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard for the monoline MGA out there, isn't it, to kind of stay profitable and still do everything that they're required to do.
Well, yes and no. I think there's
Okay.
a place for everyone. So
All right.
there are some specialist MGAs who sit in their niche and are happy to continue with that knitting, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
They do what they do. They do it exceptionally well. And then there is, the other end of the spectrum. There are, extremely large MGA groups, multifaceted. Writing multi lines of business, lots of different products in lots of different territories. They are in every respect a virtual insurer.
Yeah, I hear you. So, okay, so the future of your role, what do you see in the future of your role within Delegated, heading up an underwriting team for a new insurance player who's building their MGA profile? What's going to be on your horizon in 2025, Richard?
So it's, oh God, I don't know where to start.
Don't say December.
It's so all right. Let's have a think about this. So fundamentally, it's identifying the partners we want to work with,
Right.
and when we have successfully onboarded those partnerships, it's working with those organisations to fulfil their own strategic aims and ambitions. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
there is the criticality of the consistency of underwriting performance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have shareholders, we have our own margins and return requirements, so those have to be fulfilled for our capital models, etc. Then we have everything that is associated with the delegated model, the claims aspect, the compliance aspect, the technologies. So, for example, Operation Resilience.
Yeah.
Again, something that's
That's
coming in
bubbling under
fairly
the
new.
surface, isn't it? The G1.
Exactly right. We have we've talked extensively about the consumer duty, but consumer duty, and rightly so, is here to stay, and
Yeah.
it will continue to develop and evolve. We will get better at it in terms of our
I'm sure.
frameworks that we have in place, and how we're using this information, what those feedback loops are, how
Yeah, I
we
mean, there's
can.
something there, isn't there, about future-proofing the product as well, isn't it? So if you can continually improve the product, then it will always be a product that people are looking for. Whereas, we all know historically there have been some products that have fallen by the wayside because they no longer have a need or a role.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely focuses the mind now. So from our wordings team, in terms of the information we're receiving now, to ensure the design of those products is not just fit for kind of one large cohort, right?
Mm.
But the segments within that cohort. Okay, so that means potentially we can offer slightly different products for different customers with different needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be able to do that, don't you? Otherwise, you can't play in that market, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting angle, and I guess that there's going to be needs for underwriting teams to develop their internal skills and capabilities in order to meet these ongoing requirements. I mean, you've just mentioned the wordings, and do you remember 20 years ago the wordings person was someone that someone spoke to maybe for 10 minutes just as a matter of courtesy before before the policy was issued all badly, but and they asked them for what was the clause? A third party liability clause was always the one that I was always asked for, because they always seem to change and morph. But that wordings person now sits centrally in the whole of the underwriting process, don't they? I mean,
Absolutely, integral
which
to
must be
everything we're
great
doing.
for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it used to be, some of those wordings probably hadn't changed much in, I don't know, decades.
Yeah.
And then it was really just a compliance review. Now it's a line by line. Not only that, we now we correlate the product itself with the communication to the customer, how that's communicated. We want to make sure that they align exactly between, in the sales process, for example, whether that's through a retail broker question sets, or whether that's through the medium of a digital web, whatever it may be. So we spend a lot of time now ensuring that customers have every opportunity to understand, to be aware of the coverage available, the limits available, key exclusions. It takes a lot of work.
But I mean, sitting here kind of as someone who's worked in insurance for a long time like yourself, it's actually quite nice because we're in a place now where particularly in the MGA or delegated space, we can offer a true career path for new entrants to the market, because you can come with a degree or a skill set but actually apply it within the delegated space and actually build yourself an amazingly interesting and varied career, which I think is actually, no longer is delegated authority or binder business. It used to be called binder business. No longer is binder business the bit that no one really wants to do. I remember when we used to get the bordereaux and claims, everyone just go, yep, and sign them off. Actually, now you properly have to understand what you're signing off and the reasons for it, and actually you don't have to work in isolation with a big pile of paper. You've got to be part of a proper team, and I think that's a great opportunity for anyone moving into the London market.
I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's one of the most interesting, challenging, rewarding roles in insurance because of the sheer complexity.
Well, you have to know you have to know and work alongside everyone within your business, but actually integrally understand the operating of another business.
Correct. Absolutely. It's I love it. That's what gets me up on the Monday morning, as you asked earlier.
There you go. I knew there was an answer there somewhere, sir. So I'd just like to say it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. I think you have vast amounts of knowledge, and anyone who's working in your team is very lucky to be able to share in your experiences and work alongside you. And thank you so much for joining us today and being a friend of Green Kite and personally a friend of mine. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and thank you very much, Richard.
That's so very kind. Absolutely delighted. Been great to chat. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks for tuning in to Ask the Experts with Green Kite. And we hope that you've gained some valuable insights which help you steer your insurance journey with confidence. Remember that for every complex question, there's always a clear answer just waiting to be unearthed. Join us next time as we continue to decode the intricacies of the insurance world. More expertise on demand? If you need it, then visit our website. Take care and see you all on the next episode.